The night he left, the silence was deafening, the kind that seeps into your bones, wrapping itself around you like a cold, merciless fog. 20 years of love, laughter, and whispered promises, gone. Just a note on the kitchen counter, 7 words that shattered my world. I need space. Don't wait for me. At first, I waited. I told myself he just needed time, that he would walk through that door any moment now, regretting everything. But days turned to weeks, and then the truth settled in. He wasn't coming back. I should have grieved. I should have drowned in the weight of my sorrow. But grief has a strange way of reshaping us. It twists, it pulls, and sometimes it pushes us toward choices we never thought we'd make. What I did next, even I couldn't recognize myself. For years, my life was a portrait of happiness, or at least that's what I told myself. A beautiful home, quiet Sunday mornings wrapped in soft conversations, stolen kisses before work. It wasn't just love, it was certainty. The kind that made me believe we were untouchable. I was the woman who had it all. A husband who held my hand in crowded rooms, who whispered "I love you" in half sleep. The kind of man who made promises with steady eyes and never gave me a reason to doubt. But love, as I would come to learn, is never just about words. It's in the pauses between conversations, in the weight of an unreturned touch, the empty space in a bed too big for one. Looking back, the signs were there. Small, almost imperceptible shifts. He worked later, answered less, smiled, but something in his eyes was elsewhere. I told myself he was just tired, stressed, that life had simply settled into its rhythm, the way it does after years together. But I see it now, the way the air felt different when he walked through the door, how his kiss, once effortless, felt like an afterthought, the way my name left his lips, familiar but distant. I ignored it, pushed it away, because the alternative was unthinkable, because if I let myself acknowledge the cracks, I would have to admit the truth. And then, one ordinary evening, he was gone. It was supposed to be a normal night. I set the table, lit a candle, something simple, something familiar. I didn't even feel it at first. The absence, the quiet that stretched a little too long, the empty space where his keys should have been. It was only when I reached for my phone, expecting the usual running late text, that the first thread of unease wove its way through me. Nothing. No missed calls, no messages, just silence. Maybe I should have known then. Maybe my hands wouldn't have been so steady when I reached for the bedroom door. My breath wouldn't have been so calm. But how do you prepare for the moment your life is rewritten? The note was small, no apology, no explanation, just a few words scrawled in a hand I knew better than my own. I can't do this anymore. At first, my mind rejected it. It didn't make sense. We weren't perfect, but we were us. People don't just disappear like that. Not after years of whispered promises, of shared coffee cups and tangled limbs beneath warm sheets. This wasn't how our story ended. It couldn't be. I called him. Once, twice, 10 times, straight to voicemail. I texted, "Where are you? Come home, let's talk. Please." Nothing. An hour passed, then another. The house felt different now, like the walls were closing in, pressing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. His clothes were still in the closet, his scent still on the pillow. And yet, he was gone. I checked our bank account. No withdrawals. His social media, no updates. I even called his office, my voice cracking as I asked if he had been in that day. He had. He left early. That was it. A slow, creeping realization settled in, cold and merciless. He wasn't coming back. There was no fight, no slammed doors, no final words, just nothing. I sank onto the couch, my phone slipping from my fingers, numb, hollow, a life unraveled in a single night. And in that silence, in my darkest moment, someone was there. I didn't realize then how much I needed him. The house was empty now, just me and the silence that hung like a weight around my neck. I could hear my heartbeat in the quiet, in the spaces where his laughter used to fill the air. The shadows of his absence pressed on me, reminding me of every corner he once occupied. I found myself checking his social media again. Not that I expected anything to be different. No, it wasn't about finding answers anymore. It was about the idea of him, the illusion of connection. I clicked through pictures of vacations we never took, family gatherings we no longer had. There was nothing new, no clues, just a trail of posts frozen in time, like a life that had stopped. I drove past his office one afternoon without thinking, the same way I used to, only this time I didn't stop at the light. I didn't wait for the green, I just kept going, eyes fixed on the building that once meant everything to me. His car should have been there. It wasn't. I parked around the block, sitting there for what felt like hours, but all I saw were strangers walking by. I didn't belong in that world anymore. I wasn't a part of that life. But still, something tugged at me. I didn't know what to do with the space he had left behind. His absence was like a phantom limb I couldn't shake. I went home, staring at the four walls that used to hold our shared dreams. My mind wandered back to the conversations we had over the years, the mundane, the trivial, the way we always promised we'd talk through things no matter what. But what if there was nothing left to say? What if he was never coming back? I found myself replaying our old conversations, hearing his voice in my head, replaying the moments that should have meant something, that should have told me more than I wanted to admit. Why didn't I see the signs? Why didn't I realize what was slipping through my fingers until it was too late? Nights were the hardest. They were long, suffocating, and filled with too much empty space. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was thinking of me too, wondering if, somewhere in the world, he was feeling even a fraction of what I was. The loneliness was unbearable, and yet the fear of being alone forever was even worse. I needed someone to fill the void. I needed to feel seen again, to know that someone, anyone, cared. That's when I reached out to Daniel. It had been years since we last talked, but I had no one else to turn to. Just one message, one, "Hey, how are you?" And within hours, he called me back. It started with coffee, just two old friends, or so I told myself. The coffee shop was quiet, just the hum of the espresso machine in the background. When he walked in, I didn't know what to expect, but his smile was familiar, comforting, like it had never faded. And I realized that maybe I had been waiting for this moment more than I cared to admit. We sat at a small table by the window, and the conversation flowed easily at first. Innocent, casual, but soon the walls started to crumble. The grief I had buried, the desperation I didn't want to acknowledge, it all came spilling out. I told him everything. About Mark, about the emptiness that had consumed me, how every night I would lie in bed missing someone I wasn't sure ever existed the way I thought he did, and Daniel, with his understanding eyes, listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it. He just listened. It wasn't just a coffee break, it wasn't just two people catching up. It was something else, something deeper, something I wasn't ready for. But in that moment, I didn't care. The loneliness I had been carrying for weeks started to fade, just a little bit. He understood. He saw me. I wasn't looking for love, not really, but I had begun to crave connection in ways I hadn't realized. I wasn't ready for what that craving would lead to, but I couldn't stop myself. I knew deep down that the path I was walking was dangerous, that leaning on Daniel the way I had was only going to complicate things further. But at that moment, all I could feel was the comfort of his presence, the warmth of his voice. I wanted more. And that was the first step. The first step towards something I couldn't undo, something I wasn't sure I even wanted to undo anymore. There's something about loneliness that makes you seek out comfort, even when you know it's dangerous, even when you know that comfort isn't what it appears to be. Daniel's presence became a refuge from the storm, a brief respite from the endless silence of my own thoughts. It started innocently enough, coffee dates that turned into long conversations about everything and nothing. I was drowning in my grief, and he was there, offering me the lifeline I didn't know I needed. His words were soft, understanding, yet they cut deep in a way I hadn't expected. With him, I could talk about the pain without feeling judged. He didn't offer solutions, he just listened. The way he looked at me made the ache in my chest feel a little less heavy. Every glance felt like it held something more than just kindness. There was something there, an unspoken connection, a spark that neither of us acknowledged, but that neither of us could deny. And yet, I couldn't help but feel guilty. It wasn't that I wanted to be here with him, not like this, but I couldn't ignore the way I felt when he was around. The laughter we shared felt like it filled the spaces that had been hollowed out by Mark's absence. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. I wasn't afraid of the loneliness. But there was a constant tug of guilt at my heart. This wasn't right, was it? My marriage was over, but I wasn't ready to move on. I hadn't even healed yet. But then again, what was I supposed to do? Sit in the pain forever? Was it wrong to seek comfort, to find solace in someone who understood what I was going through? And if that solace happened to come in the form of Daniel, what difference did it make? Every time we met, the lines between right and wrong became blurrier. Each conversation was deeper, more intimate than the last. We shared things about our pasts, our fears, things I had never told anyone else. There were long silences between us, filled only with the sound of our breathing, but those silences spoke louder than words ever could. In those moments, I could feel the weight of what was coming. His touch, at first so innocent, now lingered a little longer. His hand brushed mine, and for the briefest of seconds, I felt the warmth of it, the electricity that shot through my skin. I told myself it was nothing, a slip. But the next time it happened, I didn't pull away as quickly. He didn't either. Our fingers brushed again, just long enough for me to feel the tremor that ran through both of us. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just grieving, that I needed someone to lean on. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just comfort I was seeking anymore. There was something else, something I wasn't ready to acknowledge, something I couldn't admit even to myself. One night, after an evening spent talking about everything and nothing, we found ourselves sitting closer than we ever had before. The space between us seemed to shrink with every word we spoke, every laugh that lingered a little too long. His hand brushed my arm, and for a moment I thought I might actually move away. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned in just slightly. And that was all it took. Our eyes locked. The world around us seemed to disappear as though nothing else mattered except the heat between us. I felt my heart race, my breath catch in my throat. This was dangerous, I knew that. But in that moment, it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. And just like that, the distance between us was gone. His lips were on mine before I could stop myself, and in that instant, everything I had been holding back, all the guilt, all the confusion, melted away. There was no more space between us. No more pretending. What had started as comfort had now turned into something else entirely. Something I couldn't control. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if we were both testing the waters, but it didn't stay that way for long. It deepened, grew more urgent, like two people starved for connection, for something real in the midst of everything else falling apart. I knew I should have stopped. I knew it was wrong, but in that moment, all I could think was that I needed this. I needed him. And just like that, the lines were blurred. The comfort that had once seemed innocent had become something more, something deeper, something I wasn't sure I could take back. But I didn't want to take it back. I didn't want to let go of the feeling of being seen, of being wanted. As the night unfolded, I knew, deep down, that this was the point of no return. The moment I crossed that line, there was no going back. What had started as a friendship, an innocent connection born out of loneliness, had now evolved into something I wasn't sure I was ready to handle. But one thing was certain, I couldn't undo what had just happened. And so I lay there in the quiet, knowing that from this point on, everything would be different. The comfort I had found in Daniel's presence had become a force I could no longer ignore. I wasn't sure if it was right, but I couldn't bring myself to care. All I knew was that, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone. There are moments in life when everything you thought you knew, everything you thought you understood, gets turned upside down, and all it takes is a single, unspoken decision. That night, I had no idea what was coming. The air felt heavy, thick with something unspoken, a tension that neither of us dared to acknowledge out loud. Daniel was sitting across from me, his presence familiar yet foreign in the stillness of the room. The warmth between us had been building for weeks, but tonight it felt different. It felt like something was about to snap. We had been talking, of course. That's what we did. I told him about my day, he listened, and vice versa. We laughed, we reminisced, but the laughs didn't come as easily anymore, and the silences between us stretched longer than they had before. It wasn't awkward, though. It was charged. With every word, with every glance, I felt us getting closer in a way that terrified me. The room felt smaller, like the space between us was closing in, pulling us closer together. It was as though the walls themselves were watching, waiting to see what we'd do next. I took a sip of my wine, my hand trembling slightly. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did. Then, without thinking, I reached across the table, my fingers brushing his hand. It was the smallest of gestures, a tentative touch that spoke volumes. His eyes met mine, searching, hesitant. For a second, we just stayed there. Hands barely touching, neither of us making a move to pull away. I had thought about this, thought about what it would feel like, what it meant, but the reality was something else entirely. His touch sent a wave of warmth through me, the kind of warmth I hadn't felt in months. I couldn't tell if it was right. I couldn't even tell if it was wrong. All I knew was that in that moment, I wasn't alone anymore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it didn't help. I could feel my heart racing, the beat pulsing in my ears. Everything around me faded away until there was only Daniel, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. A voice inside my head screamed at me to stop, to pull away. But then again, there was another voice, quieter, softer, that urged me to lean in, to let myself feel something other than pain. And I did. I leaned in, just a little. The distance between us was gone in an instant, and before I could even think about what was happening, his lips were on mine. The kiss was soft at first, slow, as if neither of us was sure we wanted to take the plunge. But it didn't stay slow for long. It deepened, grew more urgent, as if the silence we had both been keeping was finally breaking loose, desperate to be heard. I wanted to pull away. I knew I should, but the pull of it, the raw, desperate need for connection, it was too much. And so I stayed. My body betraying me, my mind screaming at me to stop, but my heart racing forward, too fast to catch. When we finally broke apart, it wasn't because we wanted to. It was because we had to. I could see it in his eyes, the same confusion, the same fear. This was no longer just friendship, no longer just a shared moment of comfort. This was something more, something that neither of us could control anymore. I pulled back, my breath ragged, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind was a blur of conflicting emotions. Guilt, fear, relief, longing. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I wanted, but one thing was clear. I couldn't go back. The lines had already been crossed. Daniel looked at me, his expression unreadable. I didn't mean to, he started, but his words trailed off as though he knew there was nothing left to say. The tension in the room was thick now, like the space between us had become a chasm that neither of us could bridge. I didn't know what to say either. How could I? How could I explain the whirlwind of emotions that had just torn through me? How could I tell him that, even though I knew this wasn't right, I couldn't stop myself from wanting more? That despite all my fears, a part of me was relieved to feel something, anything, other than the emptiness I had been drowning in since Mark left. But it wasn't just relief. It wasn't just the need for connection. I could feel it, deep down. There was something else between us now. something that neither of us could deny, something that was so much bigger than either of us could have imagined. I should have stopped. I should have been the one to pull away, to put an end to this madness before it went too far. But instead, I sat there, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just happened, and I realized with a sickening clarity that I didn't want it to end. I didn't want to pull away. I didn't want to lose the feeling of being seen, of being wanted. I could hear the voice in my head again, the one that told me I was making a mistake, the one that told me I was betraying everything I once held dear. But now, the voice seemed smaller, weaker, drowned out by the overwhelming need to feel something real, something alive. I was trapped in the feeling, in the moment, and I couldn't find a way out. I took a long breath, trying to steady myself, but I could still taste him on my lips, still feel the warmth of his body pressed so close to mine. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This night, this kiss, this decision, this was the moment everything changed. There was no going back now. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with complications and consequences I wasn't ready to face. But in that moment, I didn't care. All I knew was that the world had shifted beneath my feet, and nothing would ever be the same again. I had just started to feel like I was getting my life back together. Sure, I wasn't sure exactly what that life looked like, but I was moving forward. I had found solace in the routine, in the quiet moments with Daniel, in the comfort of someone who actually listened. Then, the phone rang. It was late, later than usual, but I was already awake, pacing, my mind a blur of thoughts that couldn't seem to find rest. And then the ringtone shattered the calm, ringing through the stillness like an alarm. I reached for the phone, my heart skipping a beat as I saw the name flash on the screen. Mark. For months, I had heard nothing from him. Silence. No phone calls, no texts, nothing. He had left with no explanation, no goodbye, just a note that had haunted me every day since. I had assumed he was gone for good, that I had finally gotten my freedom, my peace. But now there was a message. A message that made everything I thought I knew crumble in an instant. I stared at the phone in my hand, the words dancing before my eyes. I want to talk. That was it, just a simple request, but it felt like a punch to the gut, like a wave crashing down on me, threatening to drown me in the memories I had worked so hard to bury. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room, to block his number, to erase him from my life once and for all. But the other part of me, the part that had never truly let go, the part that still held on to the hope that he might come back, that things could somehow be fixed, felt a flicker of something else. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was finally ready to admit his mistakes, to make things right. I stared at the message, my mind a whirlwind. I made a mistake, Claire. Can we fix this? His words echoed in my head, looping, repeating like a broken record. Fix this. Could we? Should we? I had spent so many nights crying, wondering what went wrong, asking myself if I could have done something differently, if there was anything I could have said or done to make him stay. But now he was asking me to fix it, asking for my forgiveness. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could. I wasn't sure I wanted to. I had already started to build something new. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't what I thought I wanted, but it was something. Daniel had become a constant in my life, a source of comfort when I thought I had none left. I had opened up to him in ways I hadn't thought possible, let myself feel something other than pain. But now, the ghost of my past had returned, and it was threatening everything I had started to build. I paced the room, my footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor, each one a beat in the storm of emotions crashing inside me. Should I meet him? Should I listen to what he had to say? Could I even trust him after everything? The guilt in my chest tugged at me, reminding me that I had once promised to love him, to work through our issues. But then there was Daniel. Was it wrong to have found solace in his presence? Was it wrong to have started moving on? I stopped pacing and stood still, the phone still clutched tightly in my hand. For the first time in months, I didn't know what I wanted. I had built something new with Daniel, something real, something that gave me a sense of hope again. Could I just throw that away? Could I let Mark back into my life so easily after all the hurt, all the abandonment? I looked down at the screen, the words burning into my mind. Can we fix this? It was a plea, a request for a second chance. But what if I couldn't give him that chance? What if I was already too far gone? I thought about all the nights I had spent alone, the nights when I felt as if I would never be enough, when I questioned everything about myself. Then I thought about Daniel and how, in his quiet way, he had made me feel seen again. The weight of the decision was heavy, a crushing pressure that squeezed my chest, making it hard to breathe. Could I forgive Mark? Could I go back to the life I had once known, to the promises he had made? Or had I already moved on? Had I already built something that felt more like the future I had always dreamed of? The phone buzzed again, and I nearly dropped it. Another message. Please, Claire, I need to talk to you. I felt a wave of frustration flood through me, mixed with confusion and fear. Why now? Why after everything? What did he expect from me? Could I just let him back in, just like that? Or would I regret it? Would I be betraying everything I had come to understand about myself, about what I deserved? I sat down on the couch, burying my face in my hands, feeling completely lost. I had never been so unsure of anything in my life. It wasn't just about forgiving Mark, it was about everything that had changed in me. I wasn't the same person I had been when he left. I wasn't the same woman who had been left behind, abandoned, unsure of her worth. But Daniel, he had shown me something. He had given me a sense of belonging that I hadn't known I needed. Could I walk away from that? Could I throw it all away for the man who had left me in the first place? The phone rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I swiped the screen. Claire? Mark's voice came through, rough and hesitant, like he was just as unsure as I was. I know you probably hate me right now, but I need to explain. I need you to understand. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling a lump form in my throat. I didn't know if I could listen, didn't know if I was strong enough to hear whatever he had to say. But the words kept echoing in my head. Can we fix this? And deep down, I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out. I had spent hours sitting in that same chair, torn apart by the decision I had to make. My thoughts had gone in circles, relentless, each one a loop of doubt, regret, and fear. Mark's message had broken open a door I thought was sealed shut. His voice had reached across the distance, stirring up feelings I thought I had buried, feelings I didn't want to acknowledge, let alone face. I wasn't just battling with the thought of Mark's return. I was battling with everything that had led me here. Could I go back to the woman who once believed that love was enough? The woman who was willing to endure anything to hold on to a broken marriage? Could I let that part of me resurface, or had I finally outgrown it? There, in the dim light of the living room, between the phone in my hand and the weight of my own heart, I understood something profound. For so long, I had allowed my past to dictate who I was, to define my every choice. I had lived in the shadow of heartbreak, convinced that I needed someone else to feel whole, to be validated, to be loved. But now I wasn't that woman anymore. I stood up, pacing around the room, the decision looming over me like a storm. I thought of Mark, his apologetic voice, the way he asked for forgiveness, the way he wanted to fix things. It was tempting. It was familiar, but it wasn't real anymore. Not to me. What had I truly learned from all of this? That love, real love, wasn't just about fixing broken things. It wasn't about trying to put together something that was never meant to stay in one piece. Real love was about knowing your worth, about healing, about standing strong on your own 2 feet even when everything around you is crumbling. And that's when I realized I didn't need him. I didn't need Mark to make me whole. I didn't need the man who had walked away, who had left me questioning my own worth, to be a part of my life again. I had found strength in the most unlikely of places. In the quiet moments of loneliness, in the vulnerability that led me to Daniel. I had learned to stand on my own. I had learned to forgive myself. And that was the most powerful thing I could do. The phone in my hand felt heavier now, each second dragging on as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Mark's face flashed through my mind, the man I had once loved, the man who had shattered me with his silence. Was he truly sorry? Or was he just afraid of being alone? Afraid that the person who had once belonged to him was now someone else's? I could feel the pull, the temptation to call him back, to let him explain, to somehow fix everything. But deep inside, I knew what had to be done. I couldn't go back. Not to him, not to that life. I walked across the room, my steps echoing in the silence, until I stood in front of the door. The door that had once felt like the entrance to a future I had dreamed of. I reached for the handle, my fingers hovering just above it, my breath shallow. But instead of turning it, I let go. And I turned away. I didn't need to open that door. I didn't need to return to a past that had already burned me. I had spent far too long living in the shadow of someone else's mistakes, letting the ghosts of the past haunt my every decision. I was done. I was choosing me. And no one, not even Mark, could take that away from me. With one last deep breath, I walked toward the phone, the decision finally made. I dialed a number, but it wasn't his, it wasn't Mark's. It wasn't the past at all. I called Daniel. "Hey," I said, my voice steady now, the uncertainty gone. "I think we should talk." And for the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't haunted by the shadows of what could have been. I was free. As I sat there, phone to my ear, the weight of the world lifting from my shoulders, I realized that sometimes the worst heartbreak leads to the most unexpected strength. Sometimes losing someone is the best way to find yourself. And this was my new beginning. Final narration. Some doors close, and we stand at the threshold, unsure of what's next. But sometimes, when we choose not to open them, we realize that what we truly need has always been inside us, waiting to be found. The hardest part isn't letting go. It's knowing that you are enough, all on your own. I chose myself, and that was the best decision I ever made. As I stand here, looking out at the city with its promise of new beginnings, I'm reminded of how every ending carries the seed of something new. Life doesn't always hand us the answers right away. Sometimes we have to choose for ourselves, learn to trust our instincts, even when they lead us down roads that feel unfamiliar or uncertain. When I think back to that night, to the crossroads I stood at, I can't help but wonder, what would you have done if you were in Claire's shoes? Could you have let go of the past and walked away, even after everything that had happened? Have you ever found yourself torn between the life you thought you wanted and the life you deserve? The people who hurt you and the ones who help you heal? These are questions we all must face at some point in our lives, questions that test our strength, our capacity for forgiveness, and our ability to move forward. Claire's journey was far from easy, but in the end, it led her to something far more precious than she could have imagined. If you've ever been caught in the struggle between holding on and letting go, between the past and your own happiness, then you know the weight of that decision. It's heavy, but it's the one that leads us to who we are meant to become. And that's why we're here, to share stories like Claire's, to remember that even in the darkest of times, there's always the possibility of light, always the chance for a new beginning. So what would you have done in her situation? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget, if you love real-life stories with emotional depth, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, next week's story will be even more unbelievable than this one. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for joining me. Remember, no matter where you're at in life right now, it's never too late to choose your own happiness. Take that step today.